I was thinking about something that happened last week. I walked into the break room and two colleagues were standing near the coffee machine. They were talking about the weather, and then one of them mentioned a restaurant they had tried over the weekend. The whole exchange lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt important somehow.
That's interesting. I know exactly what you mean. It's one of those moments that seems insignificant on the surface, but there's actually a lot happening beneath it.
Right. And I think that's what makes workplace small talk in the United States so unique. It serves a function that goes beyond just filling silence.
I would agree with that. In many American workplaces, small talk is almost like a social infrastructure. It establishes a baseline of rapport between colleagues. Without it, the environment can feel cold or purely transactional.
Exactly. And I think the difficulty for people who are new to American workplace culture is understanding when small talk is appropriate, how much is expected, and what topics are considered safe.
That's true. There's definitely an unspoken framework. For example, when you arrive in the morning and pass someone in the hallway, there's usually an expectation of some kind of greeting or acknowledgement.
Yes, the typical exchange might be something like, "Good morning, how are you?" And the response is usually, "I'm good, thanks. How about you?" It's brief, but it signals that you recognize the other person and that you're approachable.
And I think it's important to note that this exchange is not necessarily an invitation to share how you're actually feeling. It's more of a ritual. The expected answer is almost always positive or neutral.
That's a good point. If someone asks us, "How are you?" in passing, they're generally not expecting a detailed response. Saying something like, "I'm doing well, thank you," or even just "pretty good, thanks," is perfectly appropriate.
Right. And if you're not doing well, it's usually better to keep the response light unless you're speaking with someone you have a closer relationship with. You might say, I'm hanging in there, or it's been a busy week, but I'm managing.
Exactly. Those phrases acknowledge that things might not be perfect without going into detail. They keep the conversation moving without creating discomfort.
I think that's one of the key aspects of American workplace small talk. It's designed to be comfortable and low stakes. The goal is to create a sense of connection without requiring too much emotional labor from either person.
That's well said. And the topics that tend to work well for small talk reflect that principle. The weather is probably the most universal example.
Yes, the weather is almost always safe. You can comment on whether it's unusually warm or cold, whether rain is expected, or whether the weekend forecast looks promising. It's neutral, it's relatable, and it gives the other person an easy way to respond.
And it's also timely. Everyone experiences the same weather on a given day, so it's a shared reference point. That makes it an easy way to start a conversation.
Another common topic is commuting. People often talk about traffic, public transportation delays, or how long it took them to get to work that morning.
Right. You might hear someone say, "The traffic was terrible this morning. It took me almost an hour to get here." And the other person might respond with something like, "I know what you mean. I usually leave earlier to avoid the worst of it."
And that kind of exchange can actually be useful because it gives people a sense of each other's routines and constraints. It's a way of building understanding without being too personal.
That's true. Weekend plans are another topic that comes up frequently, especially on Fridays. Someone might ask, "Do you have any plans for the weekend?" And the response could be anything from not much, just relaxing, to I'm thinking about checking out that new hiking trail.
I think weekend plans are interesting because they give people a chance to share a little bit about their interests without being too revealing. It's more personal than talking about the weather, but it's still fairly safe.
Exactly. And on Mondays, the reverse happens. People might ask, how was your weekend? And you can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with.
Right. You might say, it was nice and relaxing. I caught up on some reading, or I went to a concert with some friends. It was a lot of fun. The level of detail is really up to you.
And I think that flexibility is important. Small talk should feel natural, not forced. If you're not comfortable sharing details about your personal life, you can keep your responses general.
Absolutely. And people generally pick up on cues. If someone gives a brief, general answer, most colleagues will understand that the person doesn't want to elaborate and they'll move on.
Right. Another topic that works well in American workplaces is food. People talk about where they're going for lunch, restaurants they've tried recently, or even what they're bringing from home.
Food is interesting because it's something everyone can relate to, and it often leads to recommendations or shared experiences. Someone might say, I tried that new Thai place on Main Street. The curry was excellent. And that can lead to a brief conversation about favorite dishes or other restaurants in the area.
Yes, and food can also be a way to learn about cultural backgrounds in a respectful way. If someone brings a dish from their culture, colleagues might ask about it out of genuine curiosity.
That's true. Though I think it's important to approach those conversations with care, asking, what is that? It smells great is very different from asking, what's that weird food you're eating?
Absolutely. Tone and phrasing matter a great deal. Genuine interest is welcome. Judgment or insensitivity is not.
Another topic that comes up often is entertainment. People talk about shows they're watching, movies they've seen, or books they're reading.
Yes, and that's another area where you can share as much or as little as you want. You might say, I've been watching this documentary series about history. It's really well done. That gives the other person a chance to engage if they're interested, but it doesn't require them to.
Right. And if someone mentions a show or movie you haven't seen, you can still participate in the conversation by asking what it's about or whether they would recommend it.
Exactly. The goal isn't to have deep analytical discussions, it's just to create moments of connection throughout the day.
I think that's why small talk can feel so different from culture to culture. In some workplaces around the world, there is an expectation of getting straight to business. Small talk might be seen as a distraction or even as insincere.
That's true. But in many American workplaces, jumping straight into business without any kind of personal acknowledgement can come across as abrupt or cold.
Right. Small talk serves as a bridge. It helps people transition from their personal lives into work mode, and it signals that you see your colleagues as human beings, not just as functions.
That's a good way to put it. And I think that's why small talk is particularly important in settings like meetings. Before a meeting starts, there's often a few minutes of informal conversation.
Yes, people might talk about their commute that morning, mention something they saw in the news, or ask how someone's project is going. It helps set a collaborative tone for the meeting.
And it also gives people a chance to arrive, get settled, and mentally prepare. Starting a meeting with a few moments of small talk can make the transition feel smoother.
I agree. Although, I think it's worth noting that The expectation for small talk can vary depending on the workplace culture and the nature of the meeting. In some environments, especially fast paced or highly technical ones, meetings might start more quickly.
That's true. Context matters. In a startup or a tech company, people might value efficiency over social niceties. But even in those environments, some level of acknowledgement is usually present.
Right. It might be as simple as, hey, everyone, thanks for joining. Let's get started. That brief greeting still serves the function of recognizing people before diving into the agenda.
Exactly. Now, one area where small talk can become more complicated is when it crosses into topics that are considered sensitive or inappropriate.
Yes, this is important. In American workplaces, there are certain topics that are generally avoided in small talk because they can lead to discomfort or conflict.
Politics is probably the most obvious example. While people certainly have political opinions, bringing them up in casual workplace conversation can create tension.
Right. Even if you assume that your colleagues share your views, political discussions can become heated very quickly, and they can damage professional relationships.
And in some workplaces, there are explicit policies discouraging political discussions. But even without a formal policy, it's generally wise to avoid the topic unless you know someone very well and you're in a private setting.
Religion is another sensitive area. While people may practice different religions, discussing religious beliefs in a workplace setting can easily lead to misunderstandings or discomfort.
Yes, and that includes making assumptions about someone's religious practices based on their background. It's better to let people share that information if they choose to, rather than asking directly.
Another topic that's generally avoided is personal finances. Asking someone how much they make, how much their house cost, or how they're managing their expenses is considered intrusive.
Right. Financial matters are seen as private in American culture. Even indirect questions like, can you afford to take that vacation? Can come across as inappropriate.
Mhm. Similarly, asking about someone's age, especially a woman's age, is often considered impolite. Age can be a sensitive topic, and in a workplace setting, it's best to avoid it.
That's true. And related to that, making comments about someone's appearance can be risky. While a compliment like, I like your jacket, is usually fine, comments about someone's body, weight, or physical attractiveness are not appropriate.
Yes, and even well intentioned comments can be misinterpreted. It's better to focus on choices people make, like their clothing or hairstyle, rather than on their physical attributes.
Another area to be cautious about is health. Asking someone, why are you limping? Or have you been sick? Can feel invasive. If someone wants to share information about their health, they will.
Right. A better approach is to express concern in a general way. You might say, I hope you're feeling okay, which shows care without demanding details.
Exactly. And I think this brings us back to the core principle of small talk in American workplaces. It's about creating connection while respecting boundaries.
That's well said. Small talk should feel comfortable for everyone involved. It should never feel like an interrogation or an obligation to share personal information.
Before we continue, I want to pause for just a moment. If you're finding this conversation helpful, it would mean a lot if you could let us know by liking this video. It helps other people who are navigating American workplace culture find these discussions. Let's continue. I think one of the skills that develops over time is knowing how to read social cues. If someone gives a brief answer and doesn't ask a follow-up question, That's usually a signal that they're not interested in continuing the conversation.
Yes, and respecting that signal is important. You can politely end the exchange by saying something like, "Well, I'll let you get back to it. Have a good day."
Exactly. That allows both people to move on without awkwardness. On the other hand, if someone asks follow up questions or seems engaged, that's a signal that they're open to talking more.
Right. And I think that balance, knowing when to engage and when to step back, is one of the hallmarks of effective workplace communication in the United States.
I agree. Another aspect of small talk that's worth discussing is how it functions in virtual or hybrid work environments. Since the pandemic, many workplaces have shifted to remote or partially remote models, and that's changed the nature of informal interactions.
Yes, that's a significant shift. In a traditional office, small talk happens naturally. You run into people in the hallway, at the coffee machine, or in the elevator. But in a virtual environment, those spontaneous moments don't exist unless you create them intentionally.
Right. And I think many companies have realized that those informal interactions are valuable. They've started scheduling virtual coffee chats or casual check ins specifically to replicate the experience of small talk.
That's true. A virtual coffee chat might involve two colleagues scheduling 15 or 20 minutes to talk about non work topics. It's a way of maintaining relationships when you're not physically in the same space.
And in virtual meetings, small talk often happens in the first few minutes while people are joining. Someone might comment on a background, ask about someone's pet if it appears on camera, or mention something happening in their area.
Right. Those little moments help humanize the experience of remote work. They remind people that they're interacting with individuals, not just screens.
Exactly. Although I think some people find virtual small talk more challenging than in person interactions. It can feel more forced or awkward because the timing and flow are different.
I think that's true. In a virtual setting, there's often a slight delay, and it's harder to read body language and social cues. That can make small talk feel less natural.
Yes, and some people feel self conscious about their home environment being visible. They might worry about background noise or about their space being judged.
That's a valid concern. I think it's helpful when organizations create a culture where people feel comfortable being authentic in virtual settings. Not everyone has a perfect home office, and that should be okay.
Absolutely, and I think the same principles apply whether the interaction is virtual or in person. Small talk should be inclusive, respectful, and comfortable for everyone involved.
Right. Another dimension of small talk that we haven't fully explored is how it differs across industries. A law firm, a tech startup, and a hospital might all have different norms around informal conversation.
That's a good point. In a law firm, for example, the culture might be more formal. Small talk might still happen, but it's likely to be brief and polished. People might discuss current events in a measured way or mention professional accomplishments.
Yes. And in that kind of environment, being too casual might be seen as unprofessional. Knowing how to match the tone of the workplace is important.
On the other hand, in a tech startup, the culture might be much more relaxed. People might talk about hobbies, share personal anecdotes, or even engage in playful banter.
Right. And in that kind of environment, being too formal might make you seem distant or unapproachable. It's about finding the right balance for the specific workplace.
Yep. And in a hospital or healthcare setting, small talk might focus more on patients, cases, or day to day challenges. The intensity of the work can shape the nature of informal interactions.
That's true. In high stress environments, small talk can also serve as a way to decompress or provide emotional support. Colleagues might check in with each other more frequently to see how everyone is coping.
Right. So there's no single formula for small talk. It's shaped by the industry, the organization, the team, and even the individuals involved.
And I think that's why observation is so valuable, especially for someone new to an American workplace. Paying attention to how colleagues interact can give you a sense of what's expected and what's appropriate.
Absolutely. You can learn a lot by listening to the small talk that happens around you. What topics do people bring up? How long do conversations last? What tone do people use?
Right. And it's also okay to start slowly. You don't have to be the most talkative person in the office. Even just responding warmly when someone initiates small talk is a good place to start.
Exactly. A simple, that sounds great, or I'm glad to hear that can go a long way in building rapport.
And over time, as you become more comfortable, you can take more initiative. You might start a conversation by asking, "How was your weekend?" Or by commenting on something relevant like, "I heard we're supposed to get snow tomorrow."
Yep. And I think one thing that helps is remembering that most people appreciate when others make an effort to connect. Small talk is a way of showing that you're interested in your colleagues as people, not just as coworkers.
That's true. And even if a conversation feels a little awkward at first, the effort itself is usually valued. Most people understand that building relationships takes time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also important to remember that small talk isn't just about being friendly. It can have practical benefits as well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you have a positive relationship with your colleagues, it's easier to collaborate. People are more willing to help you, share information, and give you the benefit of the doubt when misunderstandings occur.
That's a good point. Small talk helps build trust, and trust is essential for effective teamwork.
Right. And in some cases, small talk can even open doors professionally. The colleague you chat with at the coffee machine might later think of you for a project or recommend you for an opportunity.
Yes, those informal interactions can have long term value. They're part of how professional networks are built.
Agreed. So while small talk might seem trivial on the surface, it's actually a meaningful part of workplace culture in the United States.
I think that's a good summary. Small talk is about connection, respect, and creating a positive work environment. It's a skill that can be learned and refined over time.
And it's worth the effort. The ability to engage in comfortable, appropriate small talk can make a significant difference in how people experience their workday and how they're perceived by their colleagues.
Absolutely. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, from the topics that work well to the ones that should be avoided, and from in person interactions to virtual ones.
Yes, and I think the key takeaway is that small talk is both an art and a skill. It requires attention, practice, and a willingness to adapt to different contexts.
Well said. I think this has been a valuable discussion.
I agree. Thank you for the conversation.
Likewise, it's been good to talk through these ideas.
Before we wrap up, I want to mention that we really do value hearing from people who listen to these conversations. Let us know in the comments if you've had an experience with workplace small talk that surprised you or taught you something. We'd be interested to hear about it. Or if there's a particular aspect of American workplace communication you'd like us to discuss in a future conversation, let us know.
And if you found this conversation useful, it does help us to know that. A simple like on the video tells us that this content is valuable to you.
Exactly. It helps us understand what's working and what people want to hear more about. So if you have a moment, we'd appreciate that support. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you. We'll talk again soon.